Here we go, episode 3. We're back again, Lou.
So this is one of the things I thought of when we were discussing doing Bob Dylan. I thought we're not tackling any easy low hanging fruit right out of the gate with these
No,
Beatles, Dylan, REM.
I feel better. I don't feel as pressured with this one though. With our even though there's way more content than REM
Yeah,
over a much longer period of time with an artist who, which we'll talk about in a second, who has changes from period to period almost drastically. Um, I don't have the same. I have a relationship with Bob Dylan as an artist like I do with Socrates or Hemingway or
yeah.
Rimbaud. He's much more of a concept in a lot of ways, even though he's
hmm
still a living artist creating. Just had a new record come out a couple months ago. Um, I just think thousands of years from now, they're gonna be, or hundreds of years from now, people are going to be listening and reading Bob Dylan like they listen and read Shakespeare.
I agree. I was thinking the same thing. It's less REM to me is more tangible. They feel like closer to peers. And we talked about this in that podcast where the music and the style of music, it felt like music you could play in your band. You could cover those songs and play them. And with Dylan, and this isn't just that Dylan's older than us. Um, it's more of that. I think it's more that he's
But he's
just
older than us, like, and us. We say us because we're the ones doing this, but like George Washington is older. You know what I mean?
right,
It's
right.
it's it's like he even though he's still a living person, still creating, and he'd be probably playing a show tonight if it wasn't for what we're going through. He uh, he occupies this area of, it's hard to believe George Washington was a real guy who, like, got up in the morning, was like, ugh, I gotta have breakfast. Think of Bob Dylan as taking the garbage out.
Well, that yeah, exactly. He's. I hate to use the word mythic. It's like there's Bob Dylan and then there's Bob Dylan taking the garbage out.
Right. And you don't, like I said, I think he's already occupying that space of a myth and a character of history as a living person, which is, I don't know if there's anybody else like that right now. Because
I
even
think that's
Paul
in
McCartney doesn't occupy that space, frankly.
right, right. Well, that's the interesting thing, right? Because one of the things I thought of was, okay, you've got Dylan on his own. The Beatles were arguably the best ever, but it was the collective, it was the group. And with Dylan, he's on his own in that stratosphere.
Right.
So who
Right.
else on their own as an individual artist occupies that same space?
Shakespeare,
Yeah.
Socrates, Da Vinci. I mean, hey, Hemingway, like I said, there's just it's
But to your
it's it's
point,
remarkable.
but to your point, okay, so we're younger than Dylan. Um,
Yeah, he just turned 79, I think.
yeah, but so people, like say people from his generation, people he went to college with in Minnesota. At what point, because he wasn't he what is he 20, 21, 22 when he was arguably writing some of his best songs
Yeah.
ever. I
Yeah,
mean,
he's
and so you're
62, 63.
hanging out in college with Bob Dylan and he's 21, 22
He's
theoretically,
stealing
or
your records and sleeping on your couch.
right. And
Yeah.
so at that moment in time, are you looking at this guy saying this is arguably one of the best
No,
songwriters,
he's a weirdo.
artists to ever live?
He's a weirdo. And even, we'll get into that a little bit more, but it, the amazing thing to me, and back to this whole thing about Bob Dylan as a concept and not as a person, there's so much. I mean, never mind all the recordings. There are books. I mean, there are dozens of books. I
hmm
mean, this Grill Marcus one, this, Bob's own book. chronicles. There's documentaries and films.
Not
Don't
even
look back. The Martin Scorsese No Direction Home, which is amazing. That Rolling
that's on Netflix right now, I think.
Yeah, that Rolling
Yeah.
Thunder Review, which is half fiction, but is also Martin Scorsese. That I'm Not Here movie,
Hmm.
which is different people playing different parts of Bob Dylan, with the Kate Blanchett basically playing the Don't Look Back Bob Dylan is
Hmm.
amazing.
Hmm.
Even Inside Llewyn Davis, even though it's not about Bob Dylan necessarily, it's based on Dave Van Ronk, who was a contemporary, a bitter contemporary of Bob Dylan's from Greenwich Village. Um, it just there's so much content that you could consume, and I've consumed it all, as have you, but you still like don't know this guy. You
No,
still find new things every time you
he's
listen to him.
managed to maintain a level of mystery.
Yeah, and you don't feel like it's calculated. It's
No,
just
not at all. I mean, it might be, but it doesn't feel that way
no.
from
I
my
really, like I
side.
said, if you're going to point out a true artist, and who's living today, he is one of them without a doubt. He lives an artist's life, and he's able to make a living at it. Obviously, a commercial living in some ways, but even his commerciality doesn't feel commercial.
No, I mean
Um,
he was living it without much. Then he became successful, and he really didn't change. I mean, yeah, he has a nice house, a nice pretty nice
Yeah,
spread in
probably a
Malibu,
couple.
but
Yeah, he just sold his publishing catalog for,
yeah,
they don't say the
or
number, but it's somewhere around $300+ million.
yeah, I was that was a thing I wanted to
Well,
talk
yeah, we
about
could
later.
talk more about that too, but listen, most artists, Shakespeare did not get a chance to, he got paid for what he did, assuming he existed, and which is another thing. Will 800 years from now people debate whether Bob Dylan really existed? Like we debate about Shakespeare,
Hmm.
or Plato, or or Jesus Christ. That we debate if he was a real historical figure. Um, I don't know, but so let's get into the program here a little bit.
Yeah, we have to kind of we have to stay on the rails
We had to stay on the rails, yeah, because I
with
think we
this
can with
because
this
there's
one.
just like you said, there's just so
Yeah,
much
but I think we can
that
do it with this one.
yeah.
So this first section here, this is third episode, is the third time we've done this. I want to call this segment the naysayer's lament. So a naysayer is somebody, to me, that you like something and you're talking to somebody even casually about, oh, I really like I'm a big Patriots fan, and the naysayer will go, yeah, but what about all the cheating, and you
Hmm.
know. So this would be, when you're how somebody would want to take Bob Dylan down a peg in your opinion of him by naysaying things. So I thought of three things. Maybe you want to add one or two, but his appearance in the USA for Africa, in the mid '80s, which is a weird time for Bob Dylan in the 1980s, because
Mid 80s.
yeah, because
Yeah.
he came out of, and we'll talk about this in the next segment a little bit, in the phases of Bob Dylan, but he came out of his weird Christian period, and he started working with contemporary 1980s musicians and producers to make records that had that vibe, that kind of 60s 70s rock guys making records in the 80s vibe, like Hall and
Hmm.
Oates and
Hmm.
Phil Collins, and those Steve Winwood and Eric Clapton, they were all doing it. Rod Stewart. So it's not weird, I guess, that he's in this USA for Africa thing with Cyndi Lauper and Hall and Oates.
Well,
And
he couldn't choose who was going to be, you know.
yeah, but at the same time, it just seemed like a strange. If you look at that photo of all the people together, he kind of sticks out like a sore thumb of,
Yeah.
just was weird. Because even at that time, even though he didn't have the benefit of the same historical perspective that we have of Bob Dylan now, I don't think. People, it was still too close to it was 20 years since his debut, basically. So it just, but yeah, that one's rough. I mean, that one's not maybe the perfect one. I think the second one I have down here is something that you could easily go, well, what about, so he made this for some reason, and I still reading his book, reading all the accounts, reading everything, and not just in the research for this, just in general, that whole Christian phase makes no sense. And I don't know what it came from. It just out of the blue, it seems like he makes these three records, and he's basically a born again Christian.
Mm-hmm.
He grew up Jewish, he brought up Jewish, but not like, not what we think of as East Coast people, as our friends who are Jewish, who grew up in the New York or New England area. He's from a rural kind of mining town in northern Minnesota, but still Jewish. Then he kind of, transforms himself into a cowboy, basically, or, somebody from the plains into a Woody Guthrie imitation. But he makes these three, Slow Train Coming, Saved, and Shot of Love, and I can tell you flat out, I've never listened to those albums all the way through. I don't think
Yeah.
more than once. And he had a hit though. You Got to Serve Somebody was on, I think, on Shot of Love, maybe on Saved. But that's just weird. That it just seems odd. And then he just abandoned it. It just no more. It was over. It just was so strange. He's gospel choirs, and it just was the strangest period of Bob Dylan.
Searching for something in that period.
I guess it was like he joined a cult. And then the last thing I said I had on this, naysayers would say about Bob Dylan's career, is that very peculiar Victoria's Secret commercial he did a couple years ago. It's just the oddest thing that ever happened. And there's a commercial, and then there was like an EP that you could get with purchase at Victoria's Secrets, and he's in the commercial. It is the strangest.
It's a really
piece
strange
of,
pairing.
of performance art.
Yeah.
Like who?
You don't think of push-up bras when you think of Bob Dylan.
No, it makes no sense. It makes no sense for Victoria's Secret. It makes no sense for the ad agency. It goes, it's a good idea. I can see Bob Dylan going, yeah, I'll do that, just because it's just so odd. Like, it's not even selling out. Like, I'm on this crusade right now of calling out sellouts, but it's not even a sellout because it makes no sense.
It's too bizarre to be a sellout.
Yeah, it's like Beyonce being in a commercial for Bass Pro Shops. I mean, it's just so strange.
Well, you don't know if Beyonce likes to fly fish.
Well, that's the thing. Maybe Bob Dylan's really into lingerie.
Who knows?
I don't know. It's just the strangest, weirdest thing ever, and I don't even. It's like it never happened unless you go on YouTube, and I'll add it to our YouTube playlist.
Yeah.
The commercial. I'm assuming it's on YouTube, but
everything's on YouTube.
Yeah, everything's on YouTube. So I don't know if you have anything to add to this.
The funny thing about you mentioned Shot of Love. Did you look at the album cover for Shot of Love? It has nothing to do with the vibe of the music. It's like a comic book.
It's
cover.
like a comic book panel. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't. Yeah.
It's just 1981, which again is also odd because 1981, from my memory, wasn't like the pinnacle of comic book renaissance. Like they're not today.
It's like from Batman, the television series.
Yeah.
It makes no sense. It makes no sense, and those three albums make no sense. I don't understand them at all, and I've never, like I said. Now, his book, his autobiography, Chronicles, Volume 1, there's supposed to be two more. There's supposed to be 3 volumes to this, and he's apparently working on the second one. But, this one came out in like 2004, so it's been 16 years. So almost 17 years. I don't know where Volume 2 is. Maybe in Volume 2. But this one deals with Chronicles One deals with a lot of the 1980s stuff. Maybe he'll explain it. I'd like that. I don't think it was a joke. If it was a joke or just kind of a one-off, it would have been one record. It was three records, a significant time of his life. I mean, Saved was 1980, Shot of Love's 81, Slow Train 79. It's 3 years.
I would say, you're targeting specific things people could kind of slag. Um, I would say just in general, one of the, I mean, what is the one main thing people have always commented on about Bob?
His
Tip,
voice,
it's
he can't
typically his
sing.
voice.
Yeah,
Yeah,
which is ridiculous. I mean,
it
that's,
is.
he's not a he's not a tenor. He's not trying to, sing Pagliacci. That's I always find that ridiculous when uh, also I guess you could point out that how many you know all the cover versions in the 60s especially. I mean, there are people who had gigantic hits with his songs that he
We're
didn't
gonna,
have.
yeah, that's something I want to talk about too.
So yeah, we
Is
could
the
talk about that. I mean, the Byrds created a whole career based on covering Bob Dylan songs.
hmm
Um, so so it's hard. It's hard. There isn't one thing that really stands out though for Bob Dylan for you to be able to say, yeah, but look at this.
Yeah, no.
Um, so let's focus now and let's transition now into the phases of Bob Dylan. We did this with REM and there were like three phases, right? With Bob, I probably could go any further. I got six phases. I don't know how you feel about these,
You want to
but
start with his childhood?
well,
No.
the phases to me are the phases of him as a recording artist, not the phases of his life
Okay, so we're gonna
necessarily.
start from age
Yeah, basically.
20-ish.
So the
Okay.
first phase of Bob Dylan is this folk and acoustic era where it's basically he's doing an imitation of Ramblin Jack Elliott doing an imitation of Woody Guthrie. And if you don't know who Ramblin Jack is, you really should dig in and, and listen to some Ramblin Jack Elliott. The man was very very much a disciple of Woody Guthrie. He was able to spend a lot of time with Woody. He took care of Woody before Woody really got sick and had to be put in a home. Um, and he was there for him, toured with him, hoboed with him, um, and really, had. But kind of like Bob Dylan, Ramblin' Jack grew up in New York, Brooklyn or something, or Queens, and transformed himself into a cowboy. Like really became a cowboy. Joined the rodeo, ran away from home, joined the rodeo, and discovered folk music and discovered Woody Guthrie and everything else. So similar to Bob Dylan. Um, Bob escaped Minnesota and never told lies about who he was and where he came from and who his family is and spun a myth about himself in these early years. Um, First in Minneapolis and St. Paul in college, and then in New York's Greenwich Village.
Dropped out of
And
college after a year.
yeah, and basically, slept on couches around Greenwich Village and Manhattan, to develop that persona and kind of become, the quote unquote Bob Dylan. So that's the first era. The second era is, and we'll talk more about these things as we talk about our songs. The second era is Bob Dylan goes electric.
hmm
He puts a band together. He becomes a rock musician, basically transforms into a rock and roll act, seemingly overnight in a lot of ways, shocking people who
The
saw him as the second coming of Woody Guthrie and the savior and the poet for the 1960s, especially the early 60s when civil rights and voting rights and identity politics was really going mainstream. Um, and he becomes a guy who leads a rock and roll band.
the backlash over that
Yeah,
is,
I want to talk with one of my songs. I really want to talk about that
yeah.
whole
I
backlash
think we
because
should
I think it's
definitely.
yeah. So the next era is to me Dylan goes 70s. He gets out of the 60s. He has a motorcycle accident. He disappears to Woodstock, New York, and comes out of that fog as kind of an arena act. And with new records, plus changing up the old records to fit that new way people were consuming live music, especially in the 1970s, competing right alongside with the Led Zeppelins of the world and the Who and all the other arena acts from that era. Then he goes Christian, as we touched on already, which is I think is a phase because it's 3 records, it's 3 years, it's 3 albums. Um, then he goes 80s, which we touched on a bit, and works with 80s producers, works with 80s sounds. I mean, those records have an 80s vibe to them. When you listen to, you know, Empire Burlesque in 85, especially, is probably the peak of that. Um, and then the last phase I have is Dylan goes blues, becomes a standards, his later records are suddenly he's an old blues man from the Mississippi Delta making blues records and standards.
which
You
isn't
know.
a stretch. It's he's in the he's on the last nine, so to speak. He's almost 80 years old.
Hmm.
It's full circle.
And
When
he's
he
always expressed a love for Frank Sinatra. Always.
Mhm.
He would do Sinatra songs early on his records. That I posted a picture on our IG of Dylan posing with Don Rickles and Bruce Springsteen. That's from a Frank Sinatra tribute concert that he performed at, that Frank requested for him to be at and to perform a certain song. Frank Sinatra even had a affinity for Bob Dylan. He
so even
understood.
Bob can't say no to
No,
Sinatra.
you're not saying no to Sinatra.
No.
If at anything, Sinatra's another one of those guys maybe that fits into that. The concept of Frank Sinatra is much larger than the man who Frank Sinatra was.
Yeah.
Um, so this is the part of the podcast where you're bringing 5 songs, I'm bringing 5 songs, and we're going to talk about our our fandom, our enjoyment of Bob Dylan. So Lou, why don't you kick us off with your first song?
Yeah, and this is one where again I'm not going in. I had a hard time putting them in order. Um, I do have some that I think my number one is my number one, but the rest are a little more fluid for me. So I'll just start with Every Grain of Sand. And for me, with Bob's stuff, I tend to focus more on the songwriting than the recordings. Um, as we touched on earlier, there are some songs of Dylan's that have been covered, uh, well-known covers, some more than others. Um, from a recording standpoint, I actually love. There's a cover of this song that Luca Bloom did that I love, and Luca Bloom is, for those who don't know, is an Irish Celtic artist, and his cover is much more of a waltz, but it's a really beautiful cover. It's all acoustic.
So
And
you let me ramble on
Mhm.
about Bob Dylan's weird Christian phase,
Yes,
and your first song is from Shot of Love.
yeah. I wasn't setting you up.
I think you're setting me up.
I wanted to let you go, and let you get that out of your system. But one of the things when I was researching Dylan's recording of this song, the story that I love the most is, and this is because I'm a muso and I'm kind of a geek that ways. Um, so Chuck Plotkin, the producer, um, told this really great story about how, and this is something that I noticed is kind of a pattern with when you read stories about Dylan and working with Dylan in the studio, especially. I think Danny Lanois uh, talked about this as well, where Bob's not one of those guys who is going to be in the studio for 5,000 hours. So as a producer and as an engineer,
Yeah, I
you've
ran
got to be
across
ready
that
to
too.
go.
that he was
Yeah.
ready. If most of the time he's ready to go, and he's also doesn't suffer, billions of takes, and
Yeah. So,
and he's quick to take people's input a lot of
right,
times. Yeah.
right. So, get everything ready, have mics everywhere, because I can see, in this story, it goes back to, if Bob's working on a guitar part or he's recording, but there's a piano there, you better have a vocal mic set up at the piano, because he may just sit down and write a song, and it might be
Right.
something amazing. And that's what happened. So Chuck, in my research, was looking at this, he tells a story about Bob recording his version of for this album, and there was no vocal mic at the piano. So Chuck had to stand there with a mic and record and get the take, because that might be that was the take,
Yeah, and a
but
time when, in my work currently in the music business, where recording seems very antiseptic,
mhm,
and it seems very, everybody's
it's
doing their
sterile.
parts, and most people aren't in the same room. Never mind the pandemic. Before the pandemic, people aren't in the same room. They're not working collaboratively. Everybody's doing their part. Um, that you don't you get the vibe from every Bob Dylan recording session that there's a collaboration occurring, and there is improvisation occurring,
Mhm.
to grab what is happening.
Little mistakes
And
being left in.
right, which is I think, that's part of the appeal of Bob Dylan as an artist, is that he is open. He is a completely open person to what is occurring in the moment.
And I think some people may look at him and think the opposite. Oh, he's just always been by himself doing his own thing, so he's closed off to that collaboration. And this is something I've had conversations with songwriters and artists, um, you know, who tend to, and a lot of folk artists especially, would tend to be more like, I'm writing everything myself. And, you know, I think that there's something to be said for being open to co-writing with people,
Right.
whether it's another person or three other people. You know, just be open to it and see what happens, because you may have something great.
All right, every grain of sand, shot of love. Jerk. All right. My first, so I did, I can't help but do some kind of order, and it's not an order of preference. Mine's chronological, um, you know, working in those phases to a certain degree. My first song is The Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll from The Times They Are Changing, January 64. It's his third album, but it's the first one with all original compositions. Um, to me, and maybe probably the album before this really did this, but to me, it kind of cements his reputation as the protest singer. Really kind of solidifies him in that role, even though he's 64. He's 23, 24 years old. But he just is just you just can't express what kind of superstar he is to the folk movement of that time. Um, Alongside his basically his girlfriend, Joan Baez. They're like this shining star of, couple of this movement that's occurring. Um, the whole album is completely acoustic. Bob played and sang everything. There's no other musicians on it. There's no other singers. It's just him and the producer. Um, which is, as we were just talking about how he's very collaborative. This time he wasn't, but it wasn't necessary. I mean, I think he was collaborative in the creation of these songs, and certainly collaborative with his inspirations. But when he went in to record, it's just him. The version on the album is very stark. It's very, it's an acoustic song, and it's a straight ahead, story song basically. Um, I really love the version that's on the collection called the Bootleg Series Volume 5, which is recordings from the Rolling Thunder Review Tour, the 75 tour, which is a brilliant record, and he put together this amazing group of musicians, and the version of the song on there is really the one I really really love. But the song, it's like a lot of Bob Dylan's protest songs, inspired by true events. A woman was killed Uh, an older black woman was killed by a white man um, at her place of work. I mean, basically a bar in Baltimore, and this guy hit her in the head with a cane just because he was a jerk. He hit a
Hmm.
bunch of people that night, and she wasn't bringing his drink quick enough. I mean, you can read the whole story. It's on, it's in Wikipedia. Um, and this, he read about this in the newspaper, and it was happening right then, and he wrote a song about it. The man, assaulted several people. This woman died. He murdered her, and he ends up the charge gets reduced to manslaughter, and he does 6 months in prison and pays a $750 fine. He was
Not
ironic.
shocking.
He was ironically sentenced on the same day that Martin Luther King gave the "I Have a Dream" speech.
Mm.
Um, it is it's a story that if I told you happened in 1850, you'd be like, yeah, that makes sense. But the fact that it happened in the early 1960s is insane. Um, you know, and but I'm sure if you're an African American today, probably doesn't seem crazy to you.
No.
So it is a horrible event. It is a beautiful ballad about the event, and separated from it, it's just amazing story song, which I'm a sucker for story songs. I mean, from this song to the Wreck of the Emmett Fitzgerald, there's not a story song I don't like. Give me a Harry Chapin album any day of the week. So, so I will put both versions on their playlists, the live one from '75 as well as the original. But I think it is a really good example of of Bob at that time, those first 3 or 4 records, where he is, the prince of the folk movement in the U.S. and being held up by everybody from the Pete Seegers of the world to the Beat generation as the savior.
Mm.
He's the rebirth of Woody Guthrie. He's gonna help us, fix everything that's wrong in this world. And I don't know that Bob ever bought into that, and we'll talk about later how he basically turned his back and told them he's not buying into it. But that's my first song. What's your
My
second
s-
song?
my second song, I think I'm going to go in a little bit more of an order after listening to you. Um, like a Rolling Stone, Highway 61 Revisited, 1965. Which, again, when you think about how old he was, that I just, as we're talking through this, I'm still just blown away at how young he was and how important he was at such a young age, right out of the gate. This is his sixth studio album, and this song to me is so timely. I mean, it still resonates today. Um,
Yeah, the only reason it doesn't, maybe, um, especially for people who are just classic rock fans, is because the song is so everywhere. Of all the Bob Dylan songs, that's probably that he is singing.
mm,
That song is probably the most overplayed. That's his Hotel California. That's
yeah,
his.
I wouldn't disagree with that.
So it makes it hard to listen to it
Hmm.
sometimes because you just like it's in your life so much.
Well, it's funny because I actually haven't listened to it in a long time,
For
and
that reason, probably you skip it.
well, yeah. I mean, I came back to it after such a long break, and it was, I mean, I'm talking years,
Right.
and it's, really listening to what he's singing about, and there's kind of there's a bitterness and a cynicism to who he's singing about or to, and you know, um, but at the
Well, and
same time, there's a little bit of hope there too.
let's touch on the Dylan Goes Electric thing right here with this
Mm,
song. So you listen to the song now, and it does not sound like a rock and roll song, right?
no,
It sounds like something that would be unplugged,
the
quote
recording
unquote,
is, yeah, it has an
right?
unplugged vibe to it, right?
But that's the song in a lot of ways that, uh-oh, Bob Dylan's not a folkie anymore.
Hmm.
Bob Dylan's a rock and roller. That's a song, and it's on one of the bootleg series collections, and I'll put it on I'll put it on our playlists. He performs at Newport and goes electric, and July '65. He then goes on tour of the UK
Mm-hmm.
with the Hawks, who became the band as his backing group, except for Levon Helm, who couldn't handle the booing, so he quit. Um, but that's a whole nother story. So he goes on that tour, and so there's a recording of Like a Rolling Stone that was recorded in Manchester, England. In I got the date written down somewhere. We'll come across it. But here it is, '66, May '66, and on the recording, and they preserve this, for the example. You hear somebody shout out, in between the songs where he's getting ready to set up. Somebody shouts out Judas. And then Bob goes onto the mic and says, "I don't believe you. You're a liar." And then he takes his mouth away from the mic, but you still hear him. He goes to the band, "Play it loud." And they go into Like a Rolling Stone. And it is the rocking version of Like a Rolling Stone.
Yeah.
People felt abandoned
Yeah.
and upset.
It's amazing.
How dare you make this music?
Yeah. I mean, can you imagine that happening today?
Well, I was trying to come up with a analogy, and but even if you I thought, well, what if once again Beyonce? But what if Beyonce did her whole show, and then because this is how Bob would do the electric part, she'd do her own show, she'd take a break, she'd come back out, and there'd be a full metal band,
right?
And not even as a joke, she suddenly launches into spit growl death metal,
right,
songs. And she's singing in that Cookie Monster, thing.
Right.
And she does a whole set and then walks off stage. What if she started doing that? But I don't even think that's the same thing, because I don't know. It just you can't express to people how it was. And I wasn't there, and you weren't there, obviously.
No.
But I can understand, just as a person who is a student of history, how upset people are upset at Newport. Yeah. Pete Seeger was left and went away and was crying. He was so upset. I mean, there's a story that Pete Seeger took out an axe. He tried to chop the wires. That Pete Seeger always denied he did that, but he was upset. People wanted to punch Bob Dylan. Folkies, peaceful folkies, wanted to beat him, and it's crazy to think of now, and it seems silly, but it was a big deal.
Yeah, they put all their eggs in his basket. You are our voice.
He was their savior.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, the man stood next to Martin Luther King on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial to perform a song, during the March on Washington. I mean, the man was just a time, and at a time when media wasn't oversaturating personality like it does now, with all the different formats we have of television, 24-hour news cycle, and social media, and all this stuff. It wasn't like that then. But I don't want to completely take over your Like a Rolling Stone discussion here, but but I have the same thing. I don't have this song, but my next song is similar. So,
all right. So couple of quick points before we get off this one. Al Cooper on organ on the recording, which I think is cool. There's a little bit of a false start, which is almost unnoticeable.
Well, you know the story of Al, right? And how he got on the song.
We're gonna
he just
go ahead
was
and
hanging out.
Well,
he was invited by the producer just to hang out.
Yeah.
Bob didn't really know him. He's just a kid. This is before Blood, Sweat, and Tears and whatever. And he leaned over to the producer or something. He goes, "You know what? I think an organ part in this song would really be cool."
So the producer's like, "All right,
and the guy goes,
go play
I don't know, can you do it?" And Al Cooper doesn't play the piano or the organ.
Right.
Or maybe he played the piano, but he didn't play the organ. And Al goes, "Sure, I can do it." So talk about the brashness of youth. And he made it up. He didn't even know how to play the damn instrument, really. I mean, and that's maybe why it's so amazing, because he just doesn't know what he's doing.
He's just playing the chords. Yeah.
Yeah. And basically, Bob looks over and goes, "Who's this guy?" Okay.
Right. Can you imagine that now? Just some kid playing a part, and you're like, okay, yeah, whatever. But yeah, I wanted to, speaking of the song title, I wanted to touch on, there's the misconception that folks may still have about the Rolling Stones and where they got their name
Right.
versus this where the title for this song came from, and this is has nothing to do with the band the Rolling Stones, who got their name from a blues source.
Right.
This is more from Rolling Stone gathers no
Yeah, there's no
moss.
moss, which is, yeah, or Papa was a Rolling Stone. It's
Hmm.
not, yeah, it was a very common idiom.
I think
I was
Hank
actually,
Williams had a song, right, that
I think so,
I think it was like Lost Highway. That
maybe. Yeah, 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 yeah. I was reading this morning, so the booklet that comes with the Rolling Thunder Review box set, Larry Ratso Sloman, who's a legendary rock, you know, writer, he he writes all the liners in this giant essay, and he starts off with how he discovered Bob Dylan. He goes, I didn't know really anything about Bob Dylan, the protest singer. He goes, I was a Rolling Stones kid, and I walked into the record store, and I saw this song called Like a Rolling Stone on the charts. And he goes, and I got mad, like, who's ripping off the Stones? Who's this guy? And he goes, I had to buy the song because I needed to find out, who this jerk was. And he goes, from that moment on, I changed the way I dressed. I changed what I liked. He goes, my whole life changed. I started hanging out in Greenwich Village, and and yeah, that's it's. I think to this day, people still, the magazine, the band, the Rolling Stones, this song. I mean, there's so many weird different references. If we don't continue, if the knowledge of that doesn't continue on, people will look back and go, "What?" Nobody will understand why these things all have the same name, but have not much to do with each other.
it's interesting. I wonder how much Bob Dylan was solely responsible for the influx of people into Lower Manhattan. You know,
Probably a lot. Probably. I mean, but listen, his influx was about what was going on there before him.
right?
Van Ronk was already there. There was already a whole huge folk scene going on in Greenwich Village before Bob Dylan got there. But then, yeah, he catapulted it for sure. There was a Seattle music scene before Nirvana,
Hmm.
but Nirvana launched it. Um, all right, so my next song is actually, not the same album, but kind of the same thing. From bringing it all back home, Bob Dylan's 115th Dream. It's 1965. This is the album. Basically, Dylan goes electric. And we talked, obviously we just talked about that, and Newport and the tour, and the funny thing is he meets the Beatles in August of 1964. It's the first time he meets the Beatles. He meets them in New York City after they did a show in Queens, and the legend is he Bob Dylan pulls out his marijuana, and the Beatles had never smoked pot before. And he goes, "What do you mean you never smoked pot before? You got that song, I get high, I get high, I get high." And they were like, "No, it's I can't hide, I can't hide, I can't hide." And I was like, "Oh." So he gets them high, and we know then what happened to the Beatles after they, experienced marijuana for the
Rubber
first
Soul,
time.
released in
Yeah,
1965.
exactly. So this song, especially to me, it's psychedelic before psychedelic was a thing, really, in popular music. It's 1965. It's certainly not 1967. But it's a story song, but the story is insane. It rambles. It rambles on and on. It's like a talking blues style, which is something he learned from Woody Guthrie. Um, it's about Columbus. It's about Moby Dick. But it's also about the turbulent 60s. So it's still a protest song, but because of the style of it, it doesn't fit into it's not blowing in the wind, you know? So it even starts out with a false start. It starts out with he starts and the producer stops him and he giggles like he's stoned out of his mind. He just laughs, and then they kick back into it again. Um, but even this album, Maggie's Farm's on this album, which is basically a middle finger to the folkies that were trying to pen him in. It's like, I'm not working for you no more. Um, And this song is kind of another example of that. But he's still doing. In retrospect, we can look back and say he's still doing that thing. This is a song in style not dissimilar to Hattie Carroll, but it's just off the rails. I mean, it certainly can tell it's kind of inspired by that loose creativity that can come from getting the right amount stoned, for sure. Um, so I just find it a fascinating song. I can listen to it a million times and get something different from it every time, and and it's a great example of Dylan going electric, but not. He's not becoming the Rolling Stones.
Hmm.
He's becoming what Bob Dylan's version of rock and roll is, which is this weird hybrid of Bob Dylan and Woody Guthrie and Rimbaud and you know and being influenced by the Beatles and by the Rolling Stones. I mean, of course he was.
Yeah, it definitely in that period. It's all kind of I'm influencing you, you're influencing me. I mean, the Beatles started dressing and changed their hair, and they started dressing like more like Bob. I mean, I don't think that gets talked about enough, actually. The influence
No,
he had on them.
because I think it was Bob Dylan kind of stands astride of it, but and then he disappeared, in the late 60s after his motorcycle accident. And I think he's just burnt out and he didn't want to be, because it was one thing that he was kind of the poster boy of the civil rights movement early on and that kind of protest and identity politics of the early 60s. He did not want to get dragged into protesting now the Vietnam War. I'm sure he was against the Vietnam War. I'm sure he was. But even, Joan Baez used to on stage and in publications kind of try to call him out. Where are you, Bob? We need you now.
Hmm.
We're fighting this war. We need you to fight it with us. And he didn't take the bait. He disappeared. Um, so maybe that's why, you know. And then the Birds around this time start just kind of making their entire career doing Bob Dylan songs. Hendrix, does Watchtower
Hmm.
um, and performs a lot of Dylan songs live because
Yeah,
he's a huge Bob Dylan fan.
yeah.
Um, I don't know.
I mean, there's a Hendrix cover of like a Rolling Stone on, I think, was it Live at Monterey? Um,
Yeah, he used to do that, and yeah,
that was one of his covers.
yeah, yeah,
Not as well known as to to kind of classic rock people because of Watchtower, but
right.
um,
All right,
yeah.
what's your third song?
So my third song is I'm gonna go start getting a little bit more pushing more toward after the '60s. You're a Big Girl Now, Blood on the Tracks.
Hmm.
Um, I think the thing that's interesting about this song for me is I don't think we can state how incredible Bob's lyrics are enough. I mean, I know most people that are fans of his, probably most people who are going to listen to this podcast would already know that. Um, but for me, this song actually, this is a vibe song for me. I mean, it's a song about. I mean, he's really kind of putting it all out there, and as far as the pain he's feeling over the loss of this love.
Which that
Um,
whole album, the theme of that basically album is about his divorce, right?
yeah, 1975. So we're now in the mid 70s.
Right.
But the music of the recording of this and the vibe of the song overall, the recording is just I don't know. It's just I haven't really dug into that side of it as much, but it's just I could almost not listen to the words and just enjoy the song because of the just the he's just created the key. I don't know if it's the key that it's in,
Hmm.
but it's just something that just is in that sweet spot for me. It's a great marriage of music and lyrics for me, capturing the
Yeah,
emotion.
that song and that album are are definitely a throwback too to kind of mid 60s Bob Dylan. Like Idiot Wind you feel like he could have put that song out in 65, 66, you know?
Yeah, and the funny thing is, the first song on the album, "Tangled Up in Blue," it's like you're right, but like this is, I mean, this is a very much like a ballad, right? But it's "Tangled Up in Blue" is not, it feels completely different than that. But I think you're right. It kind of, you're back into the acoustic
Hmm.
kind of realm, um, but it doesn't feel like he was taking a step back into that as much.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people will, a lot of critics and a lot of Dylan fans hold that album up as, his greatest album and their favorite. I mean, people love that record, and probably because it is very, very personal, um, in the vibe of it.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, I always kind of forget that record was 1975 because I just so much
It
feels
doesn't
like
feel like it. Yeah.
it could have been come out in 65. It feels like it's 10 years out of time for sure.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, great, 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 great album, great song. Well, I'm going to go a year before that, the album right before that, to the album Planet Wave '74. My song's Tough Mama. So this album, he reunites with the band. He leaves Columbia Records, which, just as a music business nerd, is a big deal. You know, he goes to Asylum, which a lot of artists, especially singer-songwriter artists, were flocking to Asylum at this time.
And why
Joni
is that?
Mitchell,
Let's talk about that for
because
just a minute.
so David Geffen, you know, I have mixed feelings about David Geffen. He obviously is a champion of a certain type of musician at that time, especially from where he started with Laura Nyro to starting Asylum and bringing the Eagles and Linda Ronstadt and Joni Mitchell and Neil Young and Jackson Brown and that label is the first 5 to 10 years of that label is amazing. Um, so he suckers Bob Dylan into coming over. Now, it seems like it really was an elaborate ruse of Bob Dylan and his management to to leave Columbia, only to be able to go back to Columbia after 2 records with Asylum and get the sweetheart deal of all sweetheart deals.
You're saying that you think Bob Dylan calculated the
Oh,
move.
I think he played David. And David
That's
Geffen thinks that too. I sent you an article actually. There's a
yeah.
Rolling Stone article where, so David, here's the quote
I'm
from
teeing
David
that
Geffen.
up for you. I'm
Yeah,
totally teeing that up for you.
here's the quote from David Geffen. The tour I put together sold a huge amount of records for him. Every time he did a concert, he sold his catalog. He has a lot of stuff in the vault that's about to come out, but with this deal, ownership of his masters reverts to him at the end of 5 years. So that was his new deal with Columbia after leaving Asylum. Also gets a retroactive raise on his past records, so he gets a better royalty deal on previous recordings. What I did was make it possible for him to get back his masters from Columbia. He should thank me. At the time he went with me, they weren't that interested in him. So, and it's not like, listen, Planet Waves was a hit without a doubt, and then the tour that spawned the second record, which is the live record, um, before the flood with the band, did well. They did well, but they weren't blood on the tracks. I mean, come on. So I, David Geffen, the consummate victim, which he usually is, Laura Nyro, there's a great American Masters PBS documentary about David Geffen where it'll make you really appreciate the guy as a music business genius, but also go like, come on, dude, take your yacht and your billions of dollars and stop acting like a baby. so, but hey, so back to the record and the song. So he reunites with the band. The band is at its apex of creativity at this time. They both, Bob Dylan as well as the band, have relocated to Malibu, California from Woodstock, New York. Um, I mean, the reason the band and Bob Dylan were in Woodstock was because of each other, and the reason the band and Bob Dylan are in Malibu are because of each other, basically. And this song, especially on the record, the whole record's amazing, but this song to me is like the most Robbie Robertson of Robbie Robertson guitar playing. I mean, it's just that it's Robbie. He's just all the way through. It's just an amazing collaboration between he and Bob. Are two of the greatest collaborators in the history of recorded music. And they really didn't do much recording wise. Um, but this is the apex of that as far as I'm concerned. And I wish, why didn't they play this song at the last waltz? you know, this is the song I wanted to see them perform on the last waltz. And it just seems like one of those songs when you listen to it that every bar band should be part of every bar band's set list. I'm surprised. I don't know that many people know this song or even this album that much. It was popular at the time, but it doesn't stand out as as an apex of Bob Dylan's catalog. But the song's great. It sounds like a song that Levon could be singing, and it could be on a band record too. Just like The Weight sounds like a song that could be on a Bob Dylan record and Bob Dylan singing it.
Right.
They're intertwined so much, and it's not just there that they collaborated together. It just spiritually, Bob Dylan and the band are just of one in a lot of ways to me. And this song is, I think, just the apex of that.
I don't know if this is the right time to bring this up, but I was reading recently an interview with Robbie, and we're going to talk a little bit more about Dylan and his catalog. But um, something that I didn't realize is Bob actually owns the publishing on The Weight.
Yeah, because it came out when the story came out about Bob selling his publishing to Universal Publishing Group. This song is in the list of songs.
Yeah.
Which is like, wait, that's not a Bob Dylan song. But I think it was because of Albert Grossman, who was managing Bob Dylan, but also managed the band. The band, Robbie didn't have his publishing set up. I don't know, I forget the exact story, but it's nobody feels cheated and nobody's angry about it.
Yeah.
There is somebody who feels cheated and angry about it. We'll talk about with my next song choice. But yeah, so The Weight is part of that deal.
But but the publishing reverts back to Robbie, I think in a couple of years, 2 or 3 years.
Well, and if you watch that Robbie Robertson documentary, which is amazing, that came out just a couple of years ago, and he talks about, Bob comes over to Big Pink in Woodstock to hang out, and Robbie goes, "Hey, I want to play a song for you that we just recorded, down in the basement here," and Bob listens to the song, and he looks up at Robbie and goes, "Who wrote that song?" Robbie goes, "I wrote it," and Bob goes, "Yeah, okay." He's just like, and it was the biggest compliment that Bob Dylan could give you. Basically, it's like, "All right, you're there, you're with us, now you're here," and yeah, but it makes sense. Like I said, I think the two are intertwined. They're intertwined in just so many ways, not just because the band were the backing band when Bob went electric on that tour. Just in just so many ways. They just overlap each other. This is number 4. It's your song, number 4.
Yeah. Okay. So we're getting close to the end here. My next pick is Most of the Time. So we're getting into the late 80s.
Yeah.
This is Daniel Lanois.
Yep.
Who
From
produced
Montreal.
this. Yep. And folks will recognize that name if they are U2 fans, Peter Gabriel fans.
Peter Gabriel, yeah.
Longtime producer of those folks. Definitely brings his own vibe to the production of the recording. If you strip all of that away, it's a very basic song musically. But as we talked about with Hemingway, in terms of writing, Bob's, again, this is a love song. This is a pretty, this is one of those songs where, I'm over her, but I'm not really over her. You have those moments, right, where it comes back. You're like, oh yeah, okay, and then as the song builds, he starts to get a little bit more, I don't want to say maybe not extreme, but the trying to convince himself gets a little bit more extreme, right? I don't cheat on myself. I don't run and hide.
Right.
Hide from feelings that are buried inside. I don't compromise. I don't pretend. I don't even care if I ever see her again most of the time.
He focuses actually on this album, on the Oh Mercy album, on a part of the Chronicles
Mm.
book. He talks about the recording of this record, and it kind of was his transcendence into what he, all these later records. His voice was changing. You hear the change in his voice, and which he changes his voice famously many times throughout the phases of Bob Dylan. Is he changes the way he sings, from the Nashville time, which we didn't even make a phase, Lay Lady Lay,
Yeah.
Bob Dylan voice, to this, where he's developing this kind of vocal style on this record. And coming, yeah, and doing using Daniel Lanois is actually interesting because the post-Christian albums up to this album are very 80s. They're very Hall and Oatesy sounding, right?
Yeah.
But this one isn't, because Daniel Lanois is coming off of working with U2 and working with Peter Gabriel, and
Right.
they were not into doing these kind of
No,
80s
it's
records.
very atmospheric.
Right.
It's timeless. I mean, you put on the song now, and it sounds like it was done now. What he brings as a producer, one of the things I think he brings as a producer is this. He's bringing his influences, and obviously he spent a lot of time in New Orleans, which he talks about. I think most recently with his interview with Mark Maron on his podcast.
Hmm.
But you get a lot of that Quebecois, but also a lot of that New Orleans, just kind of
Right.
those
Well,
kind of
Daniel was
that heaviness, that earthiness to it.
Well, he talks about how he ended up working with U2s because of Brian Eno.
Yeah,
Brought him in, and Brian Eno, the king of that
atmospherics. Yeah,
atmospheric kind of ethereal production vibe. This is the album and the year Dylan toured with the Dead, which he does not talk kindly of. he, he did not enjoy, but there's an album, Dylan the Dead album, where the Dead are basically his backup band, and the Grateful Dead are another group who do a lot of Bob Dylan covers in their live sets. Um, Obviously, they were very inspired by Bob Dylan, but yeah, he has not much good to say about that tour. Um, but yeah, if you look at this, you look at the Wikipedia on this album, it's one of those classic Bob Dylan records, especially of the 80s and 90s, where there's this amazing collaboration going on with all these different players on it. One of my favorite guitar players of all time plays guitar on this album, Mason Ruffner.
mm,
And if you don't know who Mason Ruffner is, he's a New Orleans guy. One of the greatest guitar players you'll ever see, and I've seen him live a couple times. He had an album actually produced by Jimmy Page. I saw him open for Jimmy Page in like 90 or 89, whatever it was, on the Outlander tour, and just an incredible guitar player, a lot like Stevie Ray Vaughan, that type of honky tonk, barroom blues rock guitar players, but never really broke through. He made a couple records for Columbia, I think, but great guitar player. But there's Neville brothers on this record. It's
yeah,
obviously they recorded in New Orleans, right?
yeah.
Um, so yeah, where Daniel made a lot of those records at the time. So great
Actually,
song.
you know what? I don't know if they did some work in Miami.
They might have. I forget. They talk about that a lot, and I think they talk about it. And like I said, it's a big part of the book. But you don't get the Neville brothers and stuff and Rock and Dopesy on playing accordion if you're not recording in New Orleans.
Right, right.
So there probably was some overlap in different places for sure. Um, yeah, no, that's a great album. That's an album that I had really never listened to much until after reading the Bob Dylan book, because he talks so much about the making of this record and kind of how it was like a rebirth for him
Yeah,
on how to make records, and really led to those incredible 90s records,
right,
into the 2000s, into the one that just came out,
right.
which is super weird, but great at the same time. All right, my number 4 song. I'm staying in that whole Planet Waves, Blood on the Tracks phase. Really, my favorite Bob Dylan record of all time is Desire, the song Hurricane,
Mm,
um, on that album, which This album's a follow-up to Blood on the Tracks. Um, it's got incredible collaboration on it as well. It's got Emmylou Harris is on it, Eric Clapton's on it. Um, he put together this amazing group of musicians that became his touring band for a couple years, called the Rolling Thunder Review. Apparently, he saw the Patti Smith band at the bitter end before Patti put out her first record, and he just loved, the how she was definitely Patti Smith and the front person, but she had this band that were very much part of what she's doing, and he wanted to have that. So he put together the band that became that Rolling Thunder Review. Um, this is a rare occasion. This album, he's got a co-writer on this album. 6 songs he co-wrote with Jacques Levy, who we kind of referenced a minute ago when we were talking about Bob's sale of his publishing. Um, the Jacques Levy's been paid every penny he's owed, or his estate now because he's passed away. Gets paid every penny he's owed for publishing and for royalties. Always has. There's never been any dispute. But Bob sells his catalog, his publishing catalog, and suddenly his widow and his estate crop up and looking for $3 million, and somehow they're getting cheated. And basically, Bob Dylan's representation and Universal Publishing are saying, no, he'll keep getting paid his royalty and he'll keep getting paid his publishing share. We're not buying his share, we're buying Bob Dylan's share.
Right.
So the lawsuit is baseless. Now, will they end up settling and giving him something? Probably, because they just want it to go away and they got money to burn. But I'd like to see them take a stand and say, no, it just would be right. But anyway, Jacques Levy was also the stage director for the Rolling Thunder Review tours. He was a Broadway director too. He did "O Calcutta" and the Doonesbury musical on Broadway, of all things. And listen, the songs that he co-wrote are brilliant on the record. So, he obviously, Bob Dylan didn't collaborate with a lot of people when it come to writing songs. So for him to collaborate, he obviously saw value in that. Hurricane is a story a lot of people know, and I don't want to go really in detail to it. There's an amazing film called Hurricane, starring Denzel Washington, about the man. Basically, he was wrongly accused and convicted of a murder. He spent almost 20 years in prison. At the time of this recording, he'd already been in prison basically 10 years. And Bob was introduced to the story and actually met Reuben Hurricane Carter, and wrote this song, and really, tried to be an activist to help this man get a new trial and get out of jail. It was another 10 years before he did, but, if you haven't seen the movie, you should see the movie. It's just a great movie. It's a great story. He actually had to change the song. They had to re-record the song because lawyers were concerned that they were opening themselves up to a lawsuit, because he names names in the song before of people maybe who did do it or didn't do the right thing or lied, in court. So they changed the lyrics a little bit and re-recorded it a couple times. But once again, it's Bob Dylan doing his version of the story song, and it's an amazing story, and it's captured like only an amazing writer can capture it. Like Truman Capote would do, or a lot of crime writers. Bob Dylan does the same thing with this song, and the whole album is amazing. The one last thing I want to say about the album, which is an amazing, story that seems insane, but is completely true. He's basically driving to the studio. He sees a attractive young woman walking down the street with a violin case, and he pulls over and starts talking to her and invites her to the session. And she plays violin on the whole album, then goes on tour and has a whole career. Scarlett Rivera.
That's what I'm saying. Like that, I don't think that would ever happen with a mainstream artist today. Maybe someone like I don't know who's the closest person
You
mainstream that you
probably
could
get
think
Me
of.
Too or something if you tried that now. I mean, and you probably deserve it. So I don't know. I mean, that's just like I said. I mean, obviously these things occur, but Al Cooper was the same way, as we talked about
Yeah,
in Like a Rolling Stone. This Scarlett Rivera. I mean, she says herself. She goes, if the light didn't change at the right time when I was walking down the street, and we didn't, my whole life is different. You
I know.
know, it's just this strange situation where Bob Dylan is so open to the universe around him that he's like, hey, you know, and maybe it was just, hey, pretty girl, let's bring her to the session. Maybe, I don't know, but without her work on this, on the record and on this song Hurricane, even, is the song is completely different.
He took a chance, you know. Like you said, he was open to the possibility. I mean, let's say they get into the session and she can't play
Right.
a
Which is
note.
highly possible. He didn't know. He just chatted her
Then
up, basically.
yeah,
It's
but
crazy.
he was open to the let's see what happens. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
Doesn't work, it doesn't work. Exactly.
But if
All
it
right.
works, it could work fabulously and we could have some amazing magic.
Last song.
Um, okay, this is tough. This whole process is tough. But I I really th- this song really hit me, especially recently. Um, just kind of hit me really hard, and there's a weight to this song that, and again with the Beatles, our first episode, we talked about this with one of George Harrison's songs. There's kind of I'm starting to see a pattern here with some of these songs, with these kind of droning mantra songs.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, for this, my favorite uh, Bob Dylan song is "A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall," and I think you could make the argument that this is his best song ever. Um, you could probably make the argument that this is one of the best songs ever written. Um, but to me, it's this, and there are a lot of theories about what this song is about.
Right.
One of the theories is that this is a conversation between God and Jesus. You know, well,
Mm-hmm.
I sent you down there to go see what's going on, and come back and report to me what you saw. And so
Right.
the whole song is that conversation, and came out at a time when the tensions were rising with Cuba, the threat of nuclear war, uh, Vietnam, all of these things swirling
Is
around.
there ecological
Oh yeah, I
with
mean,
this?
a lot of people think this song is very it's almost like Bob Dylan as Nostradamus, you know, predicting what's about to happen in the future with you know there's a line about poisoned water and tsunamis and you know
Well, Silent Spring, we talked about, this is funny because we talked about Silent Spring for a split second on the last episode. Silent Spring comes out in 62. Rachel
hmm
Carson's Silent Spring, which is,
yeah.
kind of the first mainstream discussion of, hey, this is not good, and so, yeah, I don't know if acid rain was a term at that time or not. I don't know if it had been coined yet, but that seems like a very obvious interpretation too to me.
It could be, and another way of looking at it could be, you know, okay, you went and saw all these horrific things, you know, mankind, through free will is destroying themselves,
Hmm.
and they're not listening to the message. They're not doing the right thing. The hard rain is end of times, right? The biblical, end of the world. Because I'm basically going to kind of wipe the slate clean here.
Right.
So there
There's
are
a
a lot of
reckoning.
different, yeah, there's a lot of different interpretations of this song, but it's timeless. It's just so heavy, and yeah, and again, musically very simplistic, kind of all off of one chord,
Right.
um, similar to John Lennon with
Working class
Working
hero.
Class Hero,
Yeah.
and we touched on My Sweet Lord with George Harrison, and just
Hmm.
the ending of that song, just the kind of the repetition. So I think that all kind of ties back to early, gospel, early, early folk, and those
Yeah.
types of songs. I mean, Bob obviously was steeped in all of that history and studied that and brought that to this. But again, the thing about this is he wrote this in the early 60s, and it's staggering to me how a guy that young, I think about myself at 22 years old, and I just can't fathom how somebody could write a song this incredible at such a young age, not having lived those years. I could see Bob writing this song now at almost 80 years old, having lived all the decades that he's lived and what he's seen. But 22, where's that come from?
Well, listen,
He wasn't copying anybody, you
no,
know?
but what a young, I think we talked about this last episode too. What young men were dealing with in 19, and I say men, young people, but young men too. We said this last time, what young men were dealing with in 1960, or what they witnessed other young men, their older brothers and sisters and parents deal with, is a lot different than what we're seeing people, especially for white suburban kids who are 20, 25, than what they were dealing with then. They were going to war. We were just removed from, never mind World War II, but Korea and Vietnam was starting to bubble up. These are things young men were dealing with, and just life was harder than it is now, and even with what we're going through in this instant, with the global pandemic, it's not the same. It's not the same as it was, and you're much closer to the street at that time. So I could see, why a person like Bob Dylan, who is had a different relationship with the universe than the average person has, would be able to be a portal for these types of ideas and thoughts. I mean, that's what artists do,
And he
and
put
they do it
himself
at
in
a
that
young
position.
age.
Yeah, I mean, he put himself in that position. You know, I the concept of hoboing, which you mentioned earlier, it's
Hmm.
like, he purposely said, "I'm going to go to New York City," and he just went,
Right.
And I doubt that
Hitchhiked.
he had much of a plan. He
Nope.
didn't have a.
Probably none, because you didn't need. You could get by with $10 in your pocket
I know.
for
Or
several
get fed by
days.
somebody you meet at Cafe
Yeah.
Wa, or you know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
you're not, he wasn't strolling into McDougal Street with an Amex card in his pocket, you
Yeah. The
know?
stakes were high, but in a lot of ways they weren't as high at that time. You could buy a home for $5,000
Yeah.
in the early 1960s. Now you might also have a job and you're paid really well, but you're only making $100 a week. So it's hard to. You really have to dig in on these other facts, to understand the time, and what people, how things occurred and how they happened. All right, my last song. So I did want to pick at least one song from the more modern Bob Dylan era. Um, and
That's
you
your
love this.
OCD, isn't it?
Well, no, because I do. I really love this. I really love.
So it's not, you're not trying to balance out like you did
No,
with your
no, but
past
I do want to
episode picks.
represent. I want to represent this era because I do love these albums. I mean, up
Yeah.
to the one that just came out. Speaking of a meditation, I mean, there's a 16-minute song, basically about JFK being killed. I mean, it's an insane song, that you can listen to 100 times and not even realize you ever listened to it once. So,
Mm.
and that album just came out a few months ago. But so I picked "Honest with Me" from Love and Theft. This record actually came out on September 11th, 2001.
Mm.
So, so it obviously wasn't the biggest news of the day.
Right.
It's his 31st album, but he still at that time was still and he still is reinventing his sound, reinventing the way he makes records. I mean, he's 60 at the time, but he's still right on the edge. He produced this record. It's credited to Jack Frost, but that's his pseudonym.
Yeah.
They made the record in 12 days. Like we talked about before, it was very spontaneously. They were prepared going in, but it was spontaneous at the same time. Charlie Sexton's on it playing guitar, who was
Nice.
a member of the band for several years. Larry Campbell's on it too, same thing. Um,
Charlie Sexton, one of those guys that, you know, had a moment in the late 80s.
Yeah, they tried to make him like a man, like John Mayer is. They tried to make
Right.
him John
Yeah.
Mayer before John Mayer, and it just didn't work out. But he's an amazing guitar player.
Great voice, great
Um,
guitar player.
I
Yeah.
mean, basically, the group, the Archangels, is
Love that
Stevie Ray
band.
Vaughan's backing group with Johnny
Yeah.
Sexton.
Yeah.
After Stevie Ray passed away.
Doyle
So
Bramwell and Charlie
yeah.
Sexton. Yeah.
Hmm.
We didn't really talk about this, but we kind of had this theme going of, you know, does Dylan have a song that would be the equivalent of, like, say, Imagine? So we touched
No,
on that
I
in
don't
our
think. I
first
think I
episode.
would have included that in naysayers. I mean, the only one I would think of is like Subterranean Homesick Blues or like a Rolling Stone, which are just played and played and played and played and played. But
Yeah. Knocking on Heaven's Door
yeah, no, I wouldn't. I mean, to me,
wasn't on either one of
that's
our lists.
wasn't on you. But that comes from that weird Bob Dylan phase where his voice is weird.
Mm,
Um, the Guns N' Roses cover of that is amazing.
yeah.
So um, no, I
Which,
don't
by the
think so.
way, that cover, that particular cover, came out at an odd time. If you interpret that song, when Dylan put that song out, it could be said that it's speaking about the Vietnam War. So for Guns N' Roses to cover that song in the late 80s, early 90s, it was an interesting choice, the timing of that.
Well, Guns N' Roses is a good example of a band who is not pinned down by the genre that made them famous. Um, they're not re-recording "Welcome to the Jungle" over and over again. Axl Rose is a true rock and roll rebel. I'm not a huge Guns N' Roses fan or anything, but I'm a fan of rock and roll rebels, and he's a true one. He's gonna do what he wants. He doesn't give a shit. Doesn't care about the audience. He doesn't care about the record executives. He's gonna do what he wants, and that can be ugly sometimes, but it can be amazing most of the time. So that's I think why they do that, and Van Halen doesn't. There's a million things you could go off about Bob Dylan, and we didn't talk about Johnny Cash. We didn't talk about that whole Nashville phase. I want to just say this. I'm going to put it on the YouTube playlist. Soy Bomb. You can't not love the Soy Bomb. Just real quick, 1998 Grammy performance. He's the stage setup is him performing a song with a group of folks behind him, and like in all black, and they're supposed to be this hipsters at a Bob Dylan show, and this guy Michael Portnoy pulls off his shirt and just starts dancing, and he has Soy Bomb written on his chest, and he starts dancing right next to Bob, and Bob doesn't even flinch. It's like it was planned. I think
Yeah.
everybody thought it was planned. That's why it took a minute for them to go yank him off the stage,
Yeah.
because he's on the stage for like a minute and a half
Yeah.
dancing.
Yeah.
Even he's like, aren't you gonna come get me?
I remember watching that thinking, like, what the hell is Soy Bomb?
It's the funniest thing ever. So I'll put it on the YouTube playlist. And then the other thing is Bob Dylan until now, because nobody's on tour. Bob Dylan has been on tour since June 7th, 1988.
The
He's on the
Never
Never
Ending
Ending
Tour.
Tour.
Yeah.
He's done 3,000 shows over that time. The tour has not stopped. It's ongoing. It's only stopped now because you can't tour. I don't know. He must be going. I don't know what he's doing. He must be coming out of his skin though. He's had this. There's no way he's just sitting in his house watching Netflix. I
I
mean,
mean, he's got a nice view,
and
could
he
be
just made
worse.
$300 million plus or whatever.
Yeah.
But he's the one thing I do know when this is all over, and he can physically do it. He'll be back on tour.
You know, yeah. I mean, that's the thing about, we're talking about arguably one of the best songwriters of all time. Um, Yet the guy players play, and he's a touring artist.
Yep.
So as much as he's written, he's just out there performing and playing, and that's staggering to me at his age, that I think, I could see Bob Dylan literally keeling over on stage, and that's it. That's how he's going to go out.
Yeah, probably. Or backstage after the
Yep.
show on the bus. Who
Yeah.
knows?
Just, let's
All right,
talk
that's
about
Bob
that for a
Dylan.
second.
Sure.
We got a couple of things I want to get in here. Um, best album, favorite album? Is
I
it,
said mine. Mine's Desire.
yeah. I, I
I own it
I
in every
I
format. I listen to it all the time.
I have to I don't know if this is an easy way out for me, but I struggle with finding an album of his. I feel like there's just so many great songs, but they're all from different albums, different
And that's true.
periods.
Yeah,
It's so
that's true.
hard for me.
But if I had to pick one, I listen to front to back consistently. It's that one, without a
Yeah,
doubt. And
yeah.
it's just, to me, it's the pinnacle of who Bob Dylan is that record.
Um, we didn't touch on this. Um, what was the whole thing with his 60 Minutes interview and alluding to a deal with the devil?
You can't trust a thing that comes out of Bob Dylan's mouth. You can't trust a thing that comes out of Bob Dylan's mouth. You don't know. He is smarter than you, and he is certainly more clever than anybody will ever interview him. So even when you try to play his game, like Martin Scorsese did in that last Netflix documentary about Rolling Thunder, it didn't really work because the stuff that's kind of made up and in this kind of Bob Dylan world of what's true and what's not true, it just sticks out like a sore thumb. Um, but yeah, I don't know. That's what's great about him, and it's not phony. It's he's what comes out of Bob Dylan's mouth, I think, is what he's thinking that minute. He didn't. I don't think he plans ahead and goes, "I'm
Mm,
going to really take the piss out of this guy." I just think he just comes out of his mouth. He's just that guy. He's mysterious because he's mysterious. He's not mysterious because he's trying to be mysterious.
right. Doesn't come off as pretentious
No, it's just
at
who he
all.
is. He's a vessel in a lot of ways for what comes out.
So is he on your Mount Rushmore?
Without a doubt. Yeah, no, he's and not just for music. Like I said, Bob Dylan is a cultural force that has reshaped the world, like Picasso, like Hemingway, like Shakespeare. I mean, people don't realize how many words they use that didn't exist before William Shakespeare wrote them down.
Yeah.
So, um, Bob Dylan is that, and musically for sure, but beyond that, he will go down as Confucius, as Jesus, as and I don't, not a religious. I'm not bringing religion into this, but as a man, Jesus Christ, as a man, Confucius, as a woman, back to a Rachel Carson or Joan Baez, or people like that just change the world just by simply them existing in it.
Mm, yeah. And I think one of the things about this process for this podcast even is, I find myself pausing and reflecting on the choices we're making and talking about, but reflecting on what they've meant to all of us and kind of revisiting that. I think that's nice. Um, Interesting. You alluded to this earlier about selling out, and Bob Dylan has never sold out. And then most recent news is he made the decision to sell his entire songwriting catalog, not his
Hmm.
recordings, but his songs
Hmm.
for an estimated $300 million
Right.
to Universal Music Group.
Right.
Um, and so he's 79 years old. So he's doing some estate planning.
Yep.
He's got what, 6 kids,
And grandchildren, and yeah, of
grandchildren. So
course,
he's
and
the
and and how and he's selling his work. It's no different than recording an album and selling the album. So it's not a
right,
sellout in that way.
right.
He didn't have Bob Dylan songs been in commercials? Yes. Will Bob Dylan songs continue to be? There's a Bob Dylan song in a insurance commercial or something, or a bank commercial right now. Yeah, they will. I mean, that's the world we live in now.
So for the diehard fans out there that are maybe they're a little dismayed by hearing that kind of news, like, some of these folks that are, I'll never sell out, when they're young, to hear this news, they may not fully understand the benefits of doing something like that. Like, does going through this process and doing this make it easier because now, you don't have your entire family when you're
Right.
gone having to deal with
Fighting.
approving every single deal.
Right. No,
Like,
it's smart. To me, I think, and I don't know this by any means, and it's probably not true, but I would think Bob Dylan, as a man who understands how the world works, sees what his good friend Tom Petty's estate's going through. He sees what Prince's estate's gone through. He's seen what, you know, uh, many artists who pass away, what happens if they don't have something in place. And he said, that's not going to happen to me, and he's done something about it. He does something with his music. He
mhm,
deliberately releases live recordings before they go into the public domain.
right,
That's how this whole bootleg series thing started.
right,
You got to remember, Bob Dylan started making money as a songwriter, not as a. He got a publishing deal before he had a record deal,
right,
and that's why his songs got covered by so many people, because they were shopped to these artists to perform them. He didn't become a recording star till he was several records in. He certainly wasn't a pop recording star until he went electric and started to get played on rock radio. He was not known by those people. He didn't wasn't known by the average Beatles fan necessarily.
right.
So he's always been in the business of writing and selling songs. And I just think he's what you just said. I think he doesn't want to think that there's going to be some kind of battle
Right.
later of
And so for
his
folks that,
heirs fighting
yeah,
over what to do. He's
and so
laying it
for
out for them.
for folks that may not understand, so let's say, one of Bob's songs, somebody wants to put it in a car ad, you know, well, you got to get permission from Bob's family, hypothetically,
Right.
to use the song, not the recording, but just the song. Somebody else can record a version
His
of it and put,
voice.
yeah,
Yeah.
but basically use the song in the ad. But now potentially all six kids have to make the approval.
Depends on how it's set up. Yeah. I
Right.
mean, I'm assuming it seems like he's being very deliberate, which is smart. And I think a lot of artists are doing, I mean, that's why you're seeing these sales happening. The infrastructure is there for it to occur. And people have seen how this kind of thing can tear families apart who seem fine.
Right.
They didn't seem like there was any feud going on, the Tom Petty, between his different wives and children. And then he dies, and then suddenly they're fighting
Hmm.
over stupid
It
things. And
happens all the time. It doesn't matter if it's a $10 bracelet,
right.
that your
So
mom
he is,
left, or yeah,
he's taking control of it,
yeah,
much like Lindsey Buckingham has done, and much like Stevie Nicks has done, and other artists are trying to do, so they don't have to put their family through such a thing,
and the
because
reality
everything
is
seems
there,
fine
yeah,
till it's not.
yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. Um, okay, I don't think I had anything else.
You got anything to plug?
No,
Anything you want to turn people on to?
I mean, not really, not right now.
I have two things. In the spirit of Bob Dylan and musicians like him, there's a new album out by one of my favorite bands, Lucero, 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 not the Latin or singer. I think there's a woman named. There's also a man named Lucero. The rock band from Memphis, Tennessee. They have a new album out, which is amazing. Um, Ben Nichols, the singer and songwriter of that group, writes songs very similar to some of Bob's story songs that are just amazing pieces of Southern artwork. And then TV wise, go get Apple Plus and watch Ted Lasso. Jason Sudeikis has a fish out of water story of a football coach from America who gets recruited to be a soccer coach in the UK, and it's hilarious, and it's a great show.
I could see him doing that. He's kind of a Midwestern, like Oklahoma type guy.
Which is what
That,
he plays. He does it perfectly. He's
yeah,
aw shucks kind of
it's in
character,
his
and
wheelhouse. Yeah,
yeah, it's a great show.
he was a big basketball guy, I think, growing
Yeah,
up.
he
I think that
played. I
was
think yeah. So that's it. We did it. Bob Dylan, and it's the longest one. See, we keep saying this. So we're going to edit the hell out of this.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Or you're just going to have to listen to a long episode, friends. So
Yeah.
keep up with us. Please check us out on social media, on Facebook and Instagram. You can go to our website, the5v5podcast.com. As usual, there'll be playlists that will be a companion to this episode on Spotify, Apple Music, and YouTube, and you can get links to all that stuff at our website. And that's it. Thanks, everybody.
See you, buddy.
See ya.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening. We hope you'll follow us on social media and listen to the episode's companion playlists on Spotify, Apple Music, and YouTube. Go to www.the5v5podcast.com. Thanks again to the Factory Underground for hosting and distributing the podcast. Also a big thanks to our engineer, editor, and producer, Billy Gardella, and our executive producer, Ethan Isaac.